Hello and welcome back to another video. If you're new here, my name is Emily and today we're going to be doing my April and my May wrap up. Okay. Why does that always happen to me? Every time I take a thumbnail, I drop books. Okay, so welcome back. I feel like it's been a little while. It hasn't. It's been, I think, like a week since I filmed my last video, but it feels like it's been a long time. I am in a new I'm not in a new location. I'm actually in the exact same location, but I'm just lower because I'm sitting in a chair. I have a lot of books to go through, so I figured I might as well be comfortable. In saying that, I feel like I should just jump right into it because I have so many books to cover. So the first one that I read in April was An Unexpected Peril by Deanna Rayburn. I gave this book 5 stars. This one pulled me out of a reading slump that I had been in for a while. I also, actually, if I just duck my head, I think you can see the other books in the series right up here. But yeah, this one, it was so good. It was the 6th book in the series, I think number 6. Just as incredible. The books never are not good. They're such good books. Every mystery is very gripping. The romance is good. Stoker, you know that trope where this guy like hates everyone but he's soft for the one girl he's in love with? That's him, and I'm soft for it. I love him. Would definitely recommend to literally anyone. Next, we have a couple of audiobooks. I just kind of put them all together because they're all by the same author, John E. Douglas. So we have Journey into Darkness, The Killer Across the Table, and The Anatomy of Motive. And I gave them 4 stars, 4 stars, and 3 stars. I really, honestly, since these were in April, it was all kind of a blur. I was reading a lot of his books at the time. John E. Douglas was a profiler with the FBI. So these are books about the cases that he worked on, as well as he used to go to prisons, and he would interview prisoners. Obviously, he's in prison. He would interview mostly serial killers, and just to try to understand the anatomy of motive is really all about that, understanding what that motive is behind it. The Killer Across the Table is the one where he actually is sitting across the table from the killers, and he asks them all sorts of questions, trying to figure out what that inciting incident was, what it was that sparked it. So yeah, they were all really good. I will continue listening to all of his audiobooks. Next we have a book that I read for school, and that is The Digby Play of Mary Magdalene. I gave this one 4 stars, and I should say that the 4 stars is not relative to like everything else I read, because obviously rating a medieval play is very different from rating fairy erotica. So yeah, this one I gave 4 stars, and it is relative to all the other medieval plays that I read throughout that same semester. I wrote an essay on this one and I really liked it. I think Mary Magdalene is a really fascinating character. There's a lot of different stuff in what she represents and the idea of female worship specifically, so there was a lot of fun stuff to do with this. And that's all I have to say about it, really. Would I recommend it? I don't know. I guess if you're into medieval plays, but like, I would never have read this outside of the context of the medieval class that I had to take to get my specialization in literary history. The next one is an ebook, and that is The Testament by John Grisham. This was my first book I have ever read by John Grisham, and I loved it. I knew I would. They're legal thrillers. As we all know, I'm going to be going to law school, so the idea of a legal thriller was very exciting to me. This one is about a man who changes his will at the last minute before dying, and he leaves all of his money not to his rich children, who are all now severely in debt because they're like, oh, our dad's gonna leave us everything, but to some random woman who's living as a missionary in the middle of a jungle in Brazil. And it is a lawyer who is just getting out of rehab for, I think, his 3rd time, who is put on the case. I loved him. Nate, the best. I adored him. I loved everything about him. I will say that I found the religious aspect of the novel to be a little bit interesting, and not in a good way. Not in a bad way. It was just kind of bizarre that this man he's a high-profile lawyer, and he's been in rehab, he's committed a fair amount of, like, he's not the person that I would expect to suddenly find God in a novel like this. Like, I figured he was, I guess it was like a redemption plot line, in that, like, he was like, I've been to rehab and I've done these things, but, like, God still forgives me. But it felt very weird in the context of the book. And on that note, the idea of the woman being a missionary just didn't sit right with me. It makes me feel very uncomfortable, especially as a Canadian with our country's history with colonialism and the genocide of Indigenous peoples in our country. The fact that she went to live with an Indigenous tribe in the jungle and was basically, like, trying to teach them all English and forcing her own religion on them. It felt icky to me, so I didn't really like that aspect of it. Still, though, I really liked the book overall. I found it really interesting, and I did give it 5 out of 5 stars. I will definitely continue reading more from the author. Those are just some things to consider if you want to read the book. And next up, we have 2 books because they are in the same duology, and that is Spectacle and Sensational by Jodi Lynn Drock. And these books follow a girl living in Paris, and she has a power that when she touches the glass of the morgue, she can see how the murder victim was killed. And so in both books, there's a different serial killer on the loose, and she has to help the police to figure out what's happening. I wish that this was more than just a duology. I wish that we had a lot more than 2 books in this series. I felt like the characters had a lot more places to go. I mean, clearly the author disagreed. She actually said that she felt that that was the end of the character's natural arc. I disagree. I thought there were more places that those characters could go. And I also felt that the ending of the duology was a little bit of a cop-out. If you've read it, you know what I mean by that. It just didn't feel like the natural conclusion. It felt a little forced. I actually gave them both the same rating. I gave them both 4.5 out of 5 stars because I did love them. There were just little things about them that bothered me, and it wasn't... The ending of the duology just bothered me a lot. Enough that maybe I might even lower my rating to 4 instead of 4.5, except that I just love the series so much and I find it so well written and so fascinating. Next we have another ebook, and that is The Litigators by John Grisham, and this one, it follows main character David, and he quits his job at a really high-profile firm, and he goes to work for this really shoddy firm of personal injury lawyers who they call, like, ambulance chasers. They actually have a dog named AC, which stands for ambulance chaser. They also do divorces and things like that. The characters were not likable at all, except for the main character. He was the only likable one. I really liked him, and I loved following his own individual cases that he was taking on. He took on the case of a young boy who got lead poisoning from a toy, and I thought that part was really well written. The other parts were also very good, and there was enough legal information that was really fascinating to me, but not so overbearing that someone without knowledge of the legal industry wouldn't know what's going on. And I felt like there were just enough, like, menial lawyer scenes of them, like, doing paperwork, talking to clients, going to court for really small little matters. I felt like there was enough of that to really build that world and pull you into the world of the lawyers, which I thought was really nice. But it just, the middle part dragged a little bit. The ending, 5 out of 5 stars, but because the middle part of it just kind of slowed down, I wasn't really enjoying what was happening. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And then the last book that I read in the month of April is 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act by Bob Joseph. I listened to this one on audio and I really enjoyed it. I think it's a really important book for every Canadian to read because it is so informative. There was a lot that I personally didn't know about the Indian Act and a lot that I'm sure a lot of Canadians don't know, so I think that that part of it is really, really important. However, I did only give this book 3 out of 5 stars because I found it to be almost too factual. I prefer my nonfiction to have some personal stories that I can connect to, and I felt like it was just so many facts that there wasn't anything for me to grip onto to remember. There was nothing that really connected me with it. I mean, obviously it's a horrible history and it's incredibly traumatizing, and the horror of that still sat with me even without personal stories, but I think just going that little bit deeper and having personal stories of how these different aspects of the Indian Act affected real life people, I think that would have made it really powerful. And that's just how I prefer my nonfiction. It's really a subjective thing. I like to have personal stories so that I can feel like I'm connecting more with what's happening. It helps me to remember things better. That's just me. Now, moving on to May, the first book that I read in May was The Traitor's Blade by Kevin Sands. This is the next book in the Blackthorn Key series. I think it's the 5th book. Oh, maybe it's, yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes. Sorry, I also have the Blackthorn Key series right here. So this is the 5th book in the series. I loved it. This one, just like the Deanna Raybourn series, this series never fails me. Every single book is 5 out of 5 stars. They're so good. I read this one in an entire morning. I just read the entire thing. Incredible. I loved it so much. I love the budding romance that is happening between the main character and the love interest. I think it's really cute. And this one, there was a lot of teasing him about it, and I thought that was really, really cute as well. And I loved the emphasis on friendship in this one. The friendship between the two main characters, it's just so... It's very heartwarming. I think it's so nice. Christopher and what's his friend's name? Tom! Christopher and Tom. And then, of course, Sally, the love interest. But and Sally, of course, is also a really good friend for the main character. But I love the little romance between them. But Tom is such a loyal best friend. And I love it. I love him. The next one I read, I do actually have a physical copy of the book, but I lent it to my aunt, so I don't have it with me right now. And that is Monica Hesse's They Went Left. I also gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. I read this one for Minecraft-a-thon, and it is a book that follows the main character, Sophia, after the end of World War II, when she has been liberated from a Nazi camp, and she's looking to find her brother. I found it to be, it was a different aspect of World War II that I hadn't read about before. I've read so much about what life was like in the camps and what life was like for people in Poland and people in Germany who weren't Jewish, what it was like for Jewish people who were hiding during the war, but I've never read a book about the aftermath of the war, what happens afterwards. And so this book, I think, it really gave me that perspective that I had never had before. Of course, with my Polish background and family history, the book really hit me quite deeply, and it definitely took me on a roller coaster of emotions. There were parts that were just so sweet and like heartwarming that I was crying, but like happy tears, like they were just so beautiful. There were parts that made me laugh. There were parts that made me sob. There were some steamy romantic scenes, which I wasn't expecting, but obviously which was not uninvited. I was pleased with it. It was such a fascinating view on, even though the war was ended, people were still, there were still anti-Semitical views, and there were still problems. It was hard for people to reform relationships. It was just so interesting, and it explored a lot of different aspects of that. I would definitely recommend it. The next one I read, I also read for Minecraft-a-thon, and that is Song of the Crimson Flower by Julie C. Dow. I adored this book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. But I will say, one thing I didn't know about this book is that it's set in the same world as Dow's other book, Forest of a Thousand Lanterns, and its sequel. I haven't read the sequel, and I think it would have been informative to have read the sequel first, because this takes place after the sequel has taken place. And it's different characters, but it's like the same world, so I think it just would have been helpful. Otherwise, an incredible book. I loved the romance. I loved seeing the romances and relationships between other characters, and I thought that the whole world building system with the curses and the magic and stuff like that was just really interesting, and I was definitely very hooked. I remember I stayed up till after midnight finishing it. I was about halfway through and I just couldn't stop. My brother and I had been watching the basketball game together, and he was like, "Are you gonna go to bed?" And I was like, I cannot. I need to finish this book. It was incredible. Next is one that I listened to on audio, and that is Chocolate Chip Cookie Murder by Joanne Fluke. I liked this one a lot. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I can't resist a good cozy mystery, but I have a lot of issues with the book, just things that were weird. First of all, her brother-in-law, the main character, is recruited because her brother-in-law is a police officer, and he's like, I need to get a promotion. I need someone's help to solve the case so I can get a promotion. Will you help me? Like, she owns a cookie store. Why would you ask her for help? It was just so random. And then the entire book, like, every time he does something, or every time, sorry, she does something, she comes up with something or says, oh, like, you should ask the suspect this. The police officer is like, wow, I never would have thought of that. You're so smart. And I'm like, how did you get your job? How are you qualified to be a detective if you, like, cannot solve crimes? It was just so random. And then there's another part, which this is a little bit of a spoiler, so maybe skip ahead a little bit if you don't want to hear this, but one of the love interests, I feel like they're setting it up for a love triangle too, which is... But anyways, sorry. One of the love interests is a dentist, and they're, like, investigating him because they're like, what if he's involved? And the sister finds all these photos, pornographic photos that were taken of women while they were in the dental chair. They were put unconscious by the dentist, and then they were undressed and had pornographic photos taken of them without their consent. And they find out that it was the love interest's father who he inherited his dentistry office from. So it was him, that dentist, who did it. And she never tells him. It's never brought up again. They're just like, oh, that was his dad, but, like, he's dead now, so... And I'm like, it's still a crime. Like, that's still... And then, like, he talks about his dad, and he's like, you know, like, after my dad's death, my mom was upset, and they're like, oh, like, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, your dad was gross, dude. Your dad was a criminal. It was just... Why wasn't that explored further? It was so random. I remember listening to that part, and I was in the living room. My mom was watching a movie, and I just had my headphones in, and I literally, like, took them out, and I was like, what? And then I was like, okay, like, this'll be explored later. So I put my headphones back in. Never mentioned again. It was just very bizarre. Anyway, enough about that one. On to another cozy mystery. This one I read an ebook, and it is Murder in the Marigolds by Dale Mayer. I gave this one 3 out of 5 stars. This is the 13th book in the Lovely Lethal Gardens series. And as you can tell from my 3-star rating, it is not as bad as some of the other ones were, but still not great. My biggest problem with this one, there was nothing offensive in it, at least I don't think. Some of them in the past have been very, they've included a lot of offensive language towards trans people, towards LGBTQIA plus people, and that is absolutely not okay. Those books I could barely get through because I was just so disgusted at the offensive language that was used. It was just, it made me feel uncomfortable reading it, which I never think, I think that if you read a book that makes you feel uncomfortable in that it's challenging beliefs and you're learning things, that's a different kind of uncomfortable than if you're reading a book and it's just so deeply offensive that it makes you feel uncomfortable because the author is so in the wrong. And that's the way I felt reading some of those. This one wasn't offensive at all, but it was very repetitive. Some of the dialogue bits, like, they would continuously say the same things to each other. Every time they saw each other, they'd, like, repeat the same thing. And I was like, didn't we just have this conversation last chapter? It was so repetitive, and it felt like the author was trying to fill up a word count. Now, this is the 13th book in the series, and we finally saw the first bit of something happening in the romance between the main character and the love interest. 13 books. I feel this is like Benson and Stabler with Law and Order. Like, we waited 2 decades for that, and it still hasn't happened. Like, this, I feel it's the same thing, except these books are published, like, a new book comes out every couple of months. So I won't be waiting 2 decades. I mean, who knows? It might never happen. But finally something happened, and it made me say, I have to read the rest of the series, because now the romance is going somewhere, and I really want it to. But yeah, it's, I think because the books are published, like, every couple of months, the editing is, like, non-existent. The writing just feels rushed. I just, they aren't the best quality books. I think, I don't know. I think that if the author waited a bit longer before publishing each one, like maybe even just like only publishing 2 a year, then maybe there would be more time for editing, for sensitivity reading, stuff like that, but none of that has been present so far in the series. I still like it. I love the African Grey. Thaddeus is my favorite character in the whole series. Other than Mac, the love interest, I also love him. Give me any kind man and I will love him in a book series. Like, he's just, oh, I just adore him. The next one I read, I do have, and that is The Prince and the Dressmaker by Jen Wang, and this one is a graphic novel, and the art in this, honestly, you guys, is so pretty. I don't read graphic novels very often. I find them difficult to read. I don't know, like, which box to go to next, but I had a really easy time reading this one. It's very predictable. It went exactly where I thought it would. Like, I knew exactly what would happen next. But I don't think that's a bad thing. It was actually kind of comforting for me. I really enjoyed reading it because, like, I wasn't, like, frightened. Like, every time something bad happened, I was like, it's fine. It's gonna be resolved. The only thing that was a little bit of a surprise was the romance that occurs. I thought that the romance would occur between 2 different people than it did occur between. But, I mean, it was fine. It was nice. And I love the message of inclusivity in this book. I think it was great. I think it was really fun. And, again, the art. Like, I just can't get over it. I want all of the dresses that were illustrated in this book. Next, we have another audiobook. April and May were truly the months of audiobooks, and that is The Radium Girls by Kate Moore. I give this one 5 out of 5 stars. It was so incredible. It's a nonfiction book about the girls who worked painting radium dials in the United States, starting around World War I and continuing. It was so good. It was everything I like in a nonfiction book in that it provided a lot of fact. There were legal aspects, but also there were a lot of personal stories. The author really delved into who these women were, how their lives were affected, who their families were, how their lives were affected. It was a really beautiful memorial of the women in that it told who they were. They were more than just victims of these radium companies. And I think that a lot of the times nonfiction books forget about that. But these were women who had full lives, who had families. And I think that this book captured that really, really well. It was devastating reading about what happened to these women. Like, some of it, I honestly could not imagine being told in a workplace that something is safe and then having it kill all of your friends around you, feeling those same symptoms and knowing that you're going to suffer that same painful death that your friend suffered. It's truly so horrifying that it was hard to listen to sometimes, but it was so well written, so well researched that I couldn't help but keep listening, and I adored it. It's one of my favorite nonfiction books of all time now. The next one I read was Faceless Killers by Henning Mankell, and this one is, I read it, it's an ebook, and it is translated from, I think from Swedish. It takes place in Sweden. It's a typical, like, whodunit detective mystery. The main character, the cop, isn't really that likable. He's very, piggish. Like, every time he sees a woman, he just thinks about sleeping with her and how she looks. He really objectifies all of the women in the book, which I was not a fan of. The mystery itself was really fascinating. I was so interested in it, but the fact that it was foreigners that were the killers is so xenophobic that it really took me out of the book. And the main character himself was quite racist, which I think was also like, The book itself didn't seem to have that same racist tone. Like, a lot of the other characters were advocating for immigration into Sweden, but it just still left a weird taste in my mouth. I only gave it 4 out of 5 stars rather than 5 out of 5 stars because that aspect of it was just very weird to me, and no matter how good the writing was, how good the translation was, how good the rest of the story was, made me feel icky. Okay, this next one is another ebook that I read, and it is Darling Rose Gold by Stephanie Roble. This is a fiction work that is inspired by the Gypsy Rose Blanchard story. So it is about a girl who was, her mother has Munchausen by proxy, so she was made to believe that she was sick her entire life. In this one, she doesn't team up with her boyfriend to kill her mom. In this one, she got her mom arrested, and this takes place when her mom gets out of jail. So it goes back and forth between what Rose Gold, that's the main character, what Rose Gold's life was like while her mother was in jail, and then present day from her mother's point of view, what's going on between them in their house. And it is her exacting revenge on her mother, but at the same time, like, the mother is still trying to exact revenge back on her. It's very bizarre. It was a really good thriller. I give it 4 out of 5 stars. It made me feel anxious and upset and very sad at some points. Rose Gold's relationship with her father in particular was upsetting because she was manipulative, but it was learned behavior, and so I think that her father treated her unfairly because of that. He kind of was like, oh, like, you're just like your mother, and kind of dismissed her, but she's just like her mother because that's the only way she was ever raised to be. She's never known familial love, and so it was very devastating in that way, and I felt for the main character a lot. There were a lot of emotions. It was a really good book. I actually read this one because my marketing class did an assignment based on it, and I was like, wait, that looks really good, and my library had it, so I was like, okay, I'll just borrow it and see if I like it, and I read the entire thing in a day. It was so good. Okay, this next one is, oh, it was so good, and it is We Unleash the Merciless Storm by Taylor K. Mejia. This is the sequel to We Set the Dark on Fire. It is a female-female romance, but it is so much more than that. It is a story about a revolution, and it was so good. I loved it. I read it in one day, and I'm so glad that I picked it up. I loved the first one. I read the first one in one day last year. I read it for the Reading Rush, and then I was going to get this one right away, but it wasn't available in paperback yet, and I do prefer paperbacks over hardcovers. I like that they're lighter, and I can kind of like toss them around, fold them, do whatever I want with them, you know what I mean? So I waited, and it came out in paperback, and I got it, and I'm so glad I read it. This is going to go down as one of my favorite duologies of all time. I think the covers are beautiful. I think the romance is lovely. I think all the characters are amazing. The history and the world building is so fascinating and beautiful. I can't say enough good things about this book. I think it's incredible. Okay, next we have another 5-star book, and that is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. I saw this mentioned a lot on BookTube, and it was in my TBR for May, and I did read it. It was so good. It was even better than I expected, honestly. I had heard it was incredible, but, like, it was incredible. I read it in 2 days. I have the sequel on its way coming to me. I broke my book buying ban just so I could get the sequel because I didn't even know. I thought it was a standalone, and then it ended, and I was like, the author kind of left it a little bit open. So then I looked it up, and I was like, it's a trilogy. I love the main character. I love the side characters. I thought there was going to be a romance where I didn't want one, and I was like, ugh. And then I thought there was going to be a romance where I didn't want one, but then I did want it, but then it didn't happen, and I don't think it will, for reasons that are made clear if you read the book. It is so incredibly rich in its world building, in the lore, it reminds me, I'm gonna say it, and it's gonna sound bad, but hear me out. It reminds me of Harry Potter, not in any reason except for that you feel that you're a part of this school. You feel like you're going to those classes with the students. You feel like you know the teachers. You feel like you're living in that dorm school environment. What is it called when it's a school and you live there? Boarding school. It feels like that boarding school environment, and you know the teachers. Like, you feel like you're a student there. And I loved that feeling in Harry Potter, and I never really got it anywhere else. I can't think of any books where I got it other than that, like, to that degree. And this gave me that, and I loved it, and it is way better than Harry Potter ever will be, and I cannot wait to read the sequel. And then lastly, You knew I was gonna mention it when I mentioned the Digby play of Mary Magdalene. We've got Sarah J. Maas's A Court of Silver Flames. This is the fairy erotica I was referring to, and yes, I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I loved it. Now, actually, I was talking to my friend Bailey the entire time I was reading this book, and every time something would happen, I would text her and be like, what? And she would be like, I know. Like, there were so many parts that were, like, ridiculous. So many word choices that Sarah J. Maas makes that I'm like, ooh. And just so many, like, the fact that these fairies live for, like, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, but pregnancy is just 10 months instead of 9 months. Like, I was like, ugh. And then everything just felt kind of easy because Nesta has such strong powers. So it's a romance between Nesta and Cassian. Now this one follows the Court of Thorns and Roses series, except this is not a young adult book, this is an adult book, and you can tell. Sarah J. Maas went for it with the amount of sex that is in this book and how graphic it is, her use of swear words. There was just a lot that I was like, wow, like she took adult fiction and she ran with it. But it was really good. I'm so soft for Cassian being this warrior who just is gentle, and I love Rhysand. Like, I loved him in the trilogy, and in this book I was like, this isn't your book. Like, can you go? He was so unnecessary, and like every time that like he or Nesta like bared their teeth at each other, I was like, what? They're just like, ugh. Like, pardon? It was very bizarre. If Azriel and Elaine are together in the next book, I will not read it. But if he is with Gwyn, which he better be because they are meant to be, you have no idea how fast I will be buying that book. And that's all I have to say about that one. So those are all of the books that I read in the months of April and May. May was definitely a busier reading month for me. I got a lot more reading done. And it had a lot of 5-star books, which I'm really happy about. So if you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up. You can hit the subscribe button down below if you haven't already so that you can see more of my videos. And comment down below if you have read any of these books, if you want to read any of these books, what you thought, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. Let me know why. Let's start a conversation in the comments. And I will see you guys in the next one, as usual. Bye!